It's Rob!
Tony! And I'm Jeff.
We're in gaming.
And that's you.
Hello everybody and welcome back to the Inn. For those of you who are new, I'm Warshack, or Rob if you want to call me by my real name, and for those of you returning, of course, welcome back. So, over the past couple months, I've received a couple comments saying, hey Rob, I'm brand new to Hearthstone. For those of you, welcome to Hearthstone, but your decks are a little too expensive, first of all, and if you were to recommend a deck, what would you play? So I've actually thought about it, and I'm like, okay, so why not make like a top 5 beginner decks for those players who want to go into Hearthstone, but they don't want to play, you know, the shitty McShit decks. Not saying that my all-common decks are shitty McShit, but they're just, you know, they're not going to get you past, you know, rank 8. I would say about rank 8 to 10 is where you'll sit with my all-common decks. That is just because, obviously, they're all common. But if you're looking to, you know, you're a beginner, but you're looking to play a decent deck that really doesn't cost that much, that again is also fun to play because there's a lot of beginner decks that aren't very fun to play, but they are effective, and they're kind of expensive. But anyway, so I've kind of picked out 5 of my favorite easy-ish kind of decks to play, and I've built them in such a way that it's really not that expensive to make. And then as I talk about each one, I'll kind of talk about the legendary that's in it, because I only have about 1 or 2 legendary per deck. That's, you know, that we'll talk about. And then there's actually, you can get rid of those legendaries and throw in other cards, and the difference that it'll make in the deck is really, it's not a hit or miss. The deck will still run relatively the same, and you'll still get relatively the same results. So off the bat, we'll talk about by far the cheapest deck you can play. It's really pretty simple to play, and it's probably the most known deck to play, and that's going to be the Face Hunter. There are so many variants of this deck now, and whether it be, you know, taking out 2 cards, putting in 2 cards, or a completely different outlook on how to do Face Hunter, and how the deck is made, that is, as I said, there's numerous kind of deck builds for it, but for the most part, this is what you're going to see. Everything in the deck revolves around hitting their face, which is, you know, their main life points of 30. So everything in this deck revolves around doing that. For the most part, normally you make favorable trades in a normal match, and you try to outvalue your opponent, and by the end of the game, you've got multiple cards on the field, you have a decent hand, and your opponent, again, has no cards on the field, and a relatively small hand. That would be the outcome of a standard game. But with this deck, it really, your hand isn't an issue. How many creatures on the field, really, normally you want as many as you can, but for the most part, it doesn't really matter either. You just have to make sure that with whatever card you have, you're trying to every turn burst down your opponent as much damage as possible, as fast as possible, which makes this deck pretty easy to understand. The learning curve of this deck is relatively, you know, small, but to play this deck to the maximum actually does take somewhat skill. And people are I know in the comments are gonna be like, Face Hunter skill, lols, kappa. But really though, I mean, anybody can play Face Hunter and do well with it. That's why it's you know, on our list of, you know, beginner decks to play. And it also, I think the most expensive card in the deck is a rare. So really easy to build. But to play this deck and actually hit legend with it, you have to have some sort of knowledge of when do I make a trade with Hunter's Mark? When do I play, you know, do I glaive Zuka a creature, or do I play another creature? What's more important, a weapon or a body on the board? So it's just like there is some point past just all phased with this deck once you get past the initial learning curve. But for the most part, this is a very common deck. You'll see very, very inexpensive, and it'll get you the same results as an all legendary deck or whatever the fuck you want to control warrior, very expensive deck. It can give you the same results, and it is by far the cheapest deck. So that's why that is our, you know, kind of number 1 beginner deck to play. And these aren't in any order by any chance. These are just top 5 decks that, you know, beginners I recommend trying out. They're relatively easy learning curve. They're relatively cheap, like I said, and they're very effective. So after the Face Hunter, we're moving on to the mid-range Hunter. So this does have the same tendency of dealing a lot of damage very quickly, but not every creature in the deck, and it's not built around dealing pretty much just going face every time. This is kind of I wouldn't say a nutrition battle with this deck, but it definitely, you make value trades. And you definitely can pump out the same, you know, burst damage because of the quick shots and the kill commands and your passive and the Unleash the Hound. So there's still a lot of combinations. This takes elements of the Face Hunter, but it also takes elements of a, you know, mid-range kind of deck, which mid-range, you know, during turns 4 through 6, this deck really does very well. I would say the most expensive card in the deck, obviously, is Dr. Boom. Second hand is Lothab, so obviously you have to have the Naxxramas adventure mode unlocked for Lothab. But for the most part, Dr. Boom can be taken out, and you can put in another trap, because there is only 2 traps in the deck. Or you could add, you know, if you're facing a lot of mages and paladins, throw in another flare, which is a rare. The the traps are all commons for the most part. You can throw in another Iron Beak Owl instead of Dr. Boom. So Dr. Boom isn't a necessity, but this is a legendary that, if you're new to Hearthstone, is probably going to be the first ones that you want to craft. It sucks that, you know, that there's a 7-drop in the game that fits into every single deck, it seems like, or at least 90% of them, and it's just kind of a mandatory card to have. That's just the way it is. If you're a beginner player, I recommend crafting him, or at least aiming to have him the first one crafted, just because of how many decks he fits into. So that's a little bit about Dr. Boom. Savannah Highmane, for how good it is, it's only a rare. And then if you don't have Lothab, so let's say you do not have Dr. Boom and our Lothab, very beginner, only can, you know, afford rares, I would recommend just maybe even putting another Houndmaster and another Trap, a Houndmaster and another Ironbeak, kind of feel out, or maybe even a Hunter's Mark if you're playing against a lot of Druids and a lot of, like, let's say Reno Jackson type decks, a lot of stall, a lot of taunt in their deck, so you might as well throw in another Hunter's Mark. So a lot of these cards, if you don't have them, can be replaced, and if you'd like, just shoot what you would like to replace in the comment section below, and kind of what you have to replace that with, and I will give you the best card out of that to kind of replace it with. If you just tell me, hey, Warshack, I do not have Dr. Boom, what do I replace it with? Well, user, I do not know, because I have no idea what's in your collection. So if I recommend a card and you don't have it, then you're going to respond back. And it's just like an ongoing back and forth of, hey, I don't have that. Okay, what about this? Oh, I don't have that either. What about this? And then you say, what about this? And I say, what about that? And it's just, it's chaos. So I know I've mentioned that before, but just for those of you who are new to the channel and may not have heard me say that before, I don't mind helping. It's just, if you don't give me any information, it's hard for me to help you in a way that's, you know, beneficial to me and you in a timely, efficient manner. So after we've talked about the Face Hunter, the mid-range Hunter, we'll talk about one of my favorite decks. I would say mid-range is also one of my favorites, but definitely one of the decks I play with the most, hence that's Golden Mage, is the Tempo Mage. Again, I built these decks. These aren't my normal builds that you see on me that I have with my deck guides. My deck guides kind of have a couple, they're a little bit more expensive, and they're a little bit, you know, harder learning curve to get past, and I've built these kind of top 5 beginner decks to play in a way that's cheap, but it's still effective, and the main point of the deck still, you know, it's still there. The core of the deck is there. It's just a little bit cheaper and kind of a little bit easier to understand. So, as we can see here, again, Dr. Boom is in this deck. If you do not have Dr. Boom, I recommend either throwing in maybe a Piloted Shredder, another Arcane Intellect will work. If you have another Mirror Image, that's fine as well. So it's up to you kind of what you want to replace the one legendary in the deck with. Besides that, again, I believe the highest card in the deck is a rare, which is Azure Drake. Besides that, you do have to have Blackrock Mountain for Flamewaker, so that is Flamewaker is key of this deck. So if you do not have the Blackrock adventure mode unlocked yet, or at least this wing done, I do not recommend building the Tempo Mage. Unfortunately, this is just one of the key parts of the deck. There are other Mage decks you can build that do not run Flamewaker, as I don't know, I recommend, no, hold on, what am I saying here? There are other Mage decks that do not run Flamewaker, but just for the sake of the video, we're not going to talk about those. It's just Tempo Mage, pretty easy deck to play, very RNG based, so some games you'll just blow out your opponent completely, some games you'll get stomped. It's just one of those decks, but it's definitely really fun to play. I would even say for newer players who may not, Mage is always an easier kind of class to play, and then this is probably one of the funnest decks you can play with the Mage class, in my opinion. So, alright, so that knocks out 3 of the beginner decks. Not finishing, but almost finishing. The Rush Druid, this actually wasn't even I don't even say it wasn't even a thing, but it wasn't played very much until there was a specific Reddit post that said, hey, just hit Legend with this Rush Druid, check it out, easy to play, easy cards, you know what I mean, just like, it's great. So, after that, it was like a wave, a fucking tsunami of Rush Druids all over the ladder. Which is ranked play for those of you newer players, and it was quite devastating because some of them are actually pretty good, and some of the players had no idea what they were doing. They just net decked it, and they're like, okay, let's go, let's try it, yeah. So, in a nutshell, this is very similar to the kind of playstyle you'll inhibit with the Face Hunter. Everything in the deck revolves around putting creatures on the board very early, dealing as much damage as possible. And then along with that, it also has the Savage Roar, Force of Nature, there it is, combo. So there's tons of damage output with this deck. Very fast paced. I would say it's really not that expensive to build either. There are a couple rares in the deck, and then Force of Nature is an epic. And then, of course, there is the Loatheb, which you have to have the Naxxramas again. So if you don't have, let's say you don't have Dr. Boom and you don't have the Naxxramas yet, just change out Loatheb and Dr. Boom with 2 Mark of the Wilds. That's fine. 2 Haunted Creepers would go also well in this deck, but I'm pretty sure you have to have the Nax as well to get the Haunted Creepers. I'm pretty sure. So anyway, if you don't have an adventure mode yet, buy freaking Naxxramas. There's so many good cards that come out of there. Mad Scientist, Haunted Creeper, Loatheb. The list goes on. Newborn Egg. So definitely that's an adventure mode to sink your money into if you can afford it, of course. But for the most part, another really pretty easy deck to play, not that expensive. And when I say not that, people are like, oh my god, there's epics, rares, and legendaries in all of your decks. This is impossible. How am I, as a new player, supposed to build this? Well, if you want a deck that I could make an all-common deck, which I've done, and it works to a point, but it's not going to take you beyond that. This is, you're a new player. You get free packs, you play every week, you've done your quests, you've unlocked, you've gotten your packs, you do your Tavern Brawl every week, you get even more packs, you have enough dust to build a deck, or at least make a legendary. I mean, as a beginner player, I know I definitely had at least 1 or 2 legendaries beyond the first week of playing, and I kind of built, like, let's say you really love the Mage class, so I built the legendaries that had to do with the decks I knew I was supposed to be playing. I didn't scatter all around, be like, I want to play Warrior, I want to play this, I want to play that, and was like all over the place trying to build all these kinds of decks. No, as a starter player, you definitely want to hone in on 1 or 2 classes you know you really enjoy, you know you'll like, and you know you'll want to play. Build up those decks, understand how to play the game, and then from there expand on to more classes. At least that's what I, would take it as if starting any new card game, or any, kind of game for that matter at all. Just start small, focus in, learn the basics, then expand. And then also, when I say cheap, what I meant to say, and I went on my small little tangent there, is like, in comparison, let's say Control Warrior. If you haven't played Hearthstone a ton, it's a deck that's very expensive, does very well. These decks, again, they're not that expensive in comparison to Control Warrior, but then can also gain you the same results as the Control Warrior. So that's what also I meant to say. And then our last deck, I don't know why I didn't actually know. It's not the Paladin. It is this Zoo deck right here. Most of these decks are rush based just because most rush decks are fairly cheap. So we've got the Hunter Rush, which is the face. We've got the Rush Druid, and then we also have Zoolock, which is a form of Rush, just a different class. So it's up to you kind of which Rush deck you want to try first. All of them will give you relatively the same results if you play them accordingly. Very good decks, very effective, very cheap. So this deck, I believe the most expensive card in it, again, is Mal'Ganis. There's no Dr. Boom in this deck. I do have a form of I have a form of this deck on the channel as one of my guides. It has Mal'Ganis, Dr. Boom, and Sylvanas in it. Those are 3 legendaries. I've toned this deck down to 1 legendary for the sake of, obviously, this video being catered towards the beginner players. But 1 legendary really isn't a ton to ask for, especially Mal'Ganis. If you build any Warlock deck, Mal'Ganis is going to be in it. So it's one of those cards that isn't deck specific, like, let's say, Alexstrasza, or maybe, Flame Leviathan. Not that card's fucking good anyway, but, there'll be that one deck that one card works well in. And, I kind of try not to base my decks off those, or at least the beginner sort of videos, so you're not building, one deck around one card, and it doesn't work with any of your other decks. Dr. Boom, neutral works for everybody. So, Mal'Ganis is your 1 legendary. If you do not have Mal'Ganis, no worries. Just throw in another, Ironbeak. You can throw in another Defender of Argus, which is only a rare. Besides that, the only other epic is Loatheb, and again, Naxxramas Wing. A lot of these rush decks do run Loatheb due to the fact that he makes it so your opponents cannot cast spells the next turn, which allows him to, or your field or him to live in order to hit face just one more time. So that pretty much goes over our top 5 beginner decks that are fairly cheap, very efficient, and will do very well on ladder. and have a relatively low learning curve, so you can get right in the game, understand how the deck is played. There's tons of guides. There's tons of guides actually on our channel of these decks. Maybe not the same way it's built, but the core of the deck is the same. So even if, 5 cards or 4 cards are different in the deck, if you can kind of see someone play the deck and how it's run and how they're, what cards to keep for specific classes, it can really help you in the learning curve of Hearthstone. I know those of you who, you never played a card game before, you jump into Hearthstone, it's just like, whoa, what the fuck is going on? There are so many cards, so much going on. I have no idea what I'm doing, and that's kind of why I'm going to start making some of these more catering to the beginner players, because I know it's overwhelming. Don't you worry. I've been to college. I know the first day you're like, holy shit, what is going on? So, yeah, that pretty much wraps up this video. Sorry if this clap was loud. Didn't mean to. It's kind of a finishing clap. My bad. Thank you all for joining us. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. If I missed out on anything or if I was unclear on any particular subject you'd like me to be more clear on, that is what I am here for. So, as always, guys, I'm Warshack, and happy whatever the hell day it is.